Welcome back to Two Who's Review, the Doctor Who podcast. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and today we'll be looking at The End of the World.
Yes.
What's that? In 2005, they predicted 2020. What?
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess.
Just quickly before we actually jump into The End of the World, I'm not sure if we're going to tack this onto the end of the previous episode or just leave it for the start of this one. But we actually have some other Earthshock related news. Something I figured out how to do right after the episode we recorded last ended. I figured out how to rank on the timescales.com all of the TV stories by a certain Doctor. And it turns out Earthshock is the second highest rated Fifth Doctor story. Do you want to have a guess of what the highest rated one is?
Caves of Androzani.
Bingo! That's absolutely correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, so let's jump into The End of the World now.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
pulling
sure.
it up on the timescales. Here we are. So this episode has an average rating of 7.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. We'll get into scoring near the end, but yeah, I suppose that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it's not quite that high in my opinion, but it's not. It's close enough that I'm like, yeah, fair enough.
Yes, same. It's not quite that high for me, but it's understandable that other people would feel that way. It's not like a crazy, oh, what are you talking about sort of score. Yeah, that makes sense.
Under plot, it has a 6.6.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
It's a pretty standard, spaceship under siege plot. It's got a couple of things that dress it up a bit, but we'll get to them.
Classic sort of twist villain, but they set it up pretty well. So yeah, it works.
It has a 7.9 for acting.
Yeah, it's yeah, I can't think really of a weak member of the cast, because even some of the actors who are being a bit kind of over the top, it suits the tone very well. And characters like the Mox of Balhoun are always good fun.
Yeah, I can't think of any like outright terrible performances.
Yeah.
There are a few moments that are genuinely like quite very well acted, like even for the caliber of actors that this show tends to get. Like there are a lot of really great moments for the performances alone, but again, we'll get to them. It has 7.1 for effects.
Yeah. A lot of it, thankfully, is practical effects, which I mean, I'll always. It's just my taste in movies and TV. I'll always prefer practical effects to CGI, and not just because this is mid-2000s Doctor Who and the CGI isn't always fantastic. Again, it's more of a personal thing. But even some of this CGI, like with Cassandra, it works. It doesn't look. I mean, maybe her face looks a little kind of not super realistic, but it still works. It's fine enough. And
Yeah,
you got the sun burning the earth. That's all good fun too.
Well, a lot of the exterior shots, like it's fairly obvious that they're CG, but they look like they're interesting enough to look at. Like the shot of the Earth getting destroyed looks genuinely impressive. Whenever there's debris floating around after the fact, not so much.
Yeah.
And as for the alien costuming themselves, it sort of goes half and half between a costume or like effect that looks genuinely really great and one that just looks like it was pulled out of the shed. And we'll dive more into that in a bit. It has a replay score of 6.8. To me, that's a bit high.
Yeah, I think maybe not quite that high, roughly that, but maybe not quite 6.8. Because when I watched it, it wasn't like it's fine. I think as an episode overall, there's nothing in it that really bothers me, but it wasn't as like exciting as it was the last time I watched it, which to be fair was quite a while ago, and it really wasn't as interesting or exciting to watch as it was the first time I saw it as a kid. I mean, maybe that's a bit obvious, but
It's never a story that I'm dying to revisit.
Yeah, it does what it needs to do.
Yeah.
And it does it pretty well, but it's not like, oh yeah, the end of the world. Remember that classic caper?
Well, I mean, even in terms of the series' overall narrative, in terms of the Doctor's arc with the Time War this season, like towards the end, we do get a couple of moments where the Doctor does sort of go into a bit more depth about what happened, but we get those moments in later episodes anyway, so it's not really. It doesn't really mark itself as a key. I mean, it is the first time Bad Wolf comes up, and you do kind of need that repetition of Bad Wolf in order to like have the ending of the season in order for it to have as much weight as it does.
Yeah.
In terms of prerequisite stories, 43 out of 109 people who voted said that this story does require a previous. That would be the previous episode, Rose. That to me, I get it because it does pick up immediately from where the previous left off.
Yeah.
And you do kind of need that context with Rose for her arc in this episode, but it is a standalone. It is standalone enough that it's like, yeah.
I think well, first off, actually, I'm really glad that they have that scale of saying how much continuity do you need to sort of engage with the episodes, because Doctor Who is a very strange show when it comes to continuity, because the story arcs that have the most continuity between them are mostly from the reboot series, I think, whereas the classic series, it's not entirely true, but I think for the most part it's a very sort of story-to-story thing. They're mostly self-contained.
Yeah.
So I'm glad they put that on there. And yeah, I roughly agree with that ranking. I think it does work as sort of a standalone adventure, but I do think you do need to see who Rose and the Doctor are from the first episode to really understand who they are and where they are on their journey, because even though you've got hints of the Doctor being, the usual self, funny, and turned serious and mysterious, that stuff I think is better established in the first episode, and established I think fairly well actually. So I do think you would need the previous episode to really engage with it, but it does, gun to my head, I would say, yeah, it still works pretty well as a standalone thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. In terms of where it ranks in its own season, it is the 4th lowest rated TV story in season 1 of the revival. It falls behind the Slovene 2-parter and Boomtown, which is the other Slovene episode. So it's... also the Long Game. The Long Game is also ranked lower. So it's the fifth lowest ranked. It's about... It's sort of in the middle of the season. Again, that seems about right to me.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, and we'll get to this when we talk about them, from memory, I didn't actually mind, I quite enjoyed all the Slovene episodes. There was a period where, admittedly, I'd completely forgotten that Boomtown as an episode existed. It was only when I watched, years ago, a marathon of the reboot series at some point, and the episode came up. I was like, oh, yeah, it's like, I don't know, it's almost like a placeholder thing, just sort of to get us over to the finale, which is, admittedly, in terms of memorability, isn't great. But when I watched it again, I actually kind of enjoyed it. Having said that, we'll obviously discuss this further when we get to those episodes, so we'll see.
Boomtown is a weird one in general. It's got, we'll discuss it more, but it almost feels like non-canon in a way, and that's a genuinely bizarre thing to say about.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of
a cornerstone episode of the series, but
well, yeah, I like I've forgotten her name, but the woman Slovene that he's having dinner with. I like the exchanges between her and the Doctor, so that's kind of interesting, I guess.
Okay, let's dive into it properly with an IMDb synopsis. Rose goes off on her first adventure with the Doctor, who takes her 5 billion years into the future to view a cataclysmic event the destruction of the Earth.
Yep. Yeah.
It's a ballsy first episode.
In terms, well, yeah.
Well,
First,
it's the
in time and
first
space, yeah.
first adventure in the TARDIS that many of the viewers will have taken with the Doctor. Period.
Yeah.
So to be like, rather than like showing you, the wonders of the past, the promise of the future, or the variety of an alien landscape, we're going to show you the destruction of the fucking planet.
Yeah. It's yeah, in that sense, it is pretty full on. I think, I don't know, watching it again in retrospect, I feel like it could have gone further in terms of, I don't know, with some of the risks, I suppose, because when you break down the story, it's not run of the mill, I don't think, but it's not like a super, boundary pushing episode, and even though there is quite a bit of, as I'll say again, cannon fodder that you're sort of bombarded with all these strange aliens, it's not pushing that part of the envelope too far, I don't think. So it does, in that sense, it does try to sort of get the get the best of both worlds, which it does pretty well.
Yeah, it finds a surprisingly good balance between telling the story it wants to tell while also playing off of like the characters' arcs, because quite a lot of this first episode, or second episode, I guess, is about Rose like coming to terms with the fact that she's decided to travel with the Doctor, and it's really I can't speak for Classic Who, and I'm probably going to say that a whole lot of times, but it might be the first time that Doctor Who has actually explored what that means. Like there's that exchange she has with the worker, and she's like, I didn't even think about it. I just went along with him. I don't know his name. I don't know anything about him. She has that exchange with him about the TARDIS translation matrix. It's I don't know if Classic Who has ever like explored that side of things with a companion on their first journey before.
Let me think. Also, I'm actually just going to put a small proviso here as well. It's been a while since I've watched, like before we started doing this, it had actually been a while since I started watching any Doctor Who regularly for a long time, so my memory may not be as 100% correct as it could be. However,
sure,
based on my experience watching the classic series for as long as I did, I don't think they explored that a lot. Maybe with the first companions, because there's the wonderful in the Unearthly Child when they meet the Doctor. There's really great little exchanges between them, and the Doctor being kind of an asshole, which is, I mean, taking a risk like that with the Doctor, it works better in some cases than others, but it was quite funny at that point, where one of them's Ian, he says, "You're treating us like children," and the Doctor's like, "Really? Children of my civilization would be insulted." So that quality of the companions sort of coming to grips with the alienness or the alien nature of the Doctor and his lifestyle, or their lifestyle, like what they do where they travel and all that. I think it's there, and it is pronounced in various other episodes in the classic series, again, especially in An Unearthly Child, but you're not wrong to point that out, that it seems kind of unique, because it's just a way that, with the writing, that Rose is engaging with these ideas that is, I think, a bit different to how other characters would have done, even in the classic series, so I think you're not wrong to point it out.
And it's that aspect of Rose that I wish they explored a bit more.
Yeah.
Because like it seems like it goes from this like genuine questioning of the situation and the whole thing. It just seems to go from that directly into, oh no, I'm all in. I'm all in, and also I love this man.
Yeah.
Like that just goes from zero to that way too quickly for my liking.
Yeah. Because that element her, like her curiosity. It is probably one of the most intriguing parts of her personality, and I'm sure I'll probably remember more as we go through this season. But yeah, I think it's a shame they didn't explore that element a bit further.
But I think the episode clearly knew what it was doing, because for the entire second half of the episode, Rose is locked in a room, and a more interesting character is left to be the Doctor's companion. This is also I said I'd be doing this, but this is Rose gets captured counter number 1.
Okay.
She gets locked in the room with the sun shield going down. That's the first time she gets trapped or captured, and the Doctor needs to rescue her. We'll keep that updated as we go along. But yeah, she doesn't really do much in terms of like her arc works for her story, but she's very isolated from the actual plot.
Yeah, you wonder, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the episode, but when I was watching the Sea Devils the other day, there's this great bit where Jo has to help the Doctor escape, and she's, to put it bluntly, like she's really doing stuff. She comes in, she helps distract this guard, and she really sort of helps the Doctor. She plays a good participating role in the plot. So yeah, it's a little odd, you could say, like, if indeed this counter of Rose getting captured and not being able to do much, if that's as high as you imply it to be, it is a little odd that should happen.
And it absolutely is.
Especially given that, some of the great companions that would come along even in RTD's time, Martha and Donna from memory were really quite participatory. They participated a lot in the plot.
I don't even know if is participatory even a word? I'm not sure if it is.
I'm gonna pretend it is.
Participatory? They participated. You had the right instinct in just abandoning that train of thought.
I have a creative writing degree. I should know this, but anyway.
But yeah, it's for a lot of the action in the back half of the episode, the role of companion is taken on by Jabe, the living tree. And she's a great character.
Yeah, she's pretty good.
I do like her. She's also got that. If she had survived, I think that she would have made a great companion, because she also has that inquisitive nature. She scans the Doctor to find out what species she's from. She takes a vested interest in his exploration of Platform 1. She's proactive. She takes steps in helping the Doctor, and it does lead to her ultimate sacrifice.
And she does press him more to find out who he is, like with the species scanner and more pressing questions, really.
Yeah. It's all of the hallmarks of a good companion are there. It would have been interesting, and it also would have played into something that I really want the show to do more of, which is not so many modern day human companions. I'd like to see there be a slight variety there, and having a tree on the TARDIS would have made for an interesting change.
Yeah, it would have been. Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty fair assessment of those characters.
Talking of the trees, let's start talking about the alien races that we see in this episode. We get quite a smorgasbord of them as they're being introduced to Platform 1. The gift scene is quite a nice way of showing the cultures and their differences, and it's also a nice scene for fish out of water humor for Rose. Of course, there's the air from my lungs, bodily saliva. But that scene does also kind of highlight a problem that I do have with the episode overall, is like, as I mentioned with the effects, like, you can really tell which alien species they wanted you to focus on the most. There are some exceptions, like obviously the face of Bo prop is unbelievably impressive, and it holds up incredibly well. In fact, part of me thinks that they made the face of Bo prop and it was so good, and they were like, well, we got to use this again. Like, we put too much work into this, and then that's why they folded it into Jack later on. If they spent a good
deal of money on it, then yeah.
And also for the most part, the species that look the best are the ones that are plot important. Which is why at the end, when it's like, I wonder who did this, kind of the mystery is kind of taken away, because, I mean, first of all, it's Cassandra from a mile away, but even if you didn't, you're not going to think that it's one of the species that looks like shit.
Well, here's the thing, and I'm glad you've raised the issue of special effects, because this could be, again, me coming from a classic Who background. I'm not bothered by a lot of the special effects, particularly the practical effects, even if you can tell that they're, these sort of just sculpted suits and they're, I don't know, maybe not super realistic. It doesn't bother me that much. Now, granted, that might just be because, again, coming from a classic Who background, let's say that even in the practical effects department, not all the costumes were stellar. I don't know if you've ever seen The Curse of Peladon, but there's one alien there that looks fake as hell.
Right.
And trust me, like, if you look it up, you will actively laugh, because even by classic Who standards, not great special effects. So that element doesn't bother me too much. And I have to say, I quite like the design choices they went with the characters. Not just because they're using practical effects, but they're very Doctor Who sort of alien designs for me. I don't know how much control RTD would have had over those decisions, but I think there's a clear influence from the classic series coming in, but I think it's handled really well. It's like a good transition from the visual language, I guess you would say, of the classic series to the new series. So I really like, for instance, the Mox of Balhoun. Which is, I think, is probably just, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's probably just a guy with this suit kind of in front of him, and his body is probably inside the big chair that the Mox sits in. Well, that reminds me of Syl, the creepy slug guy from... He's in two different Sixth Doctor stories, but that element of using special effects that's kind of just convincing enough, that's that kind of middle ground between being minimalist, so that they're obviously not stretching the budget too much, but like still interesting and kind of real and physical. I really like the fact that they've gone that route here. And
you see, that's interesting. The Mox of Balhoun has always reminded me of Jim Carrey's Grinch.
Oh yeah, no, that's fair.
Like, they've got very similar faces.
Yeah, they do.
But I am glad that they didn't go 100% humanoid with all of the aliens.
Yeah, I absolutely.
The Mox genuinely looks really good.
And again, I think that's I don't know if I'd say it's a genuine tribute, but I think visually it is a bit of a link to classic Who, because if you look at some of those creature designs, man, they are wacky. Like, oh my god. Again, if you look at stuff like The Curse of Peladon or The Invasion of Time, some of those designs for costumes and creatures, you just think, man, what were the BBC doing? But that, for me, that's a key part of Doctor Who, certainly classic Who overall. It's watching it knowing you really don't know what you're going to be given, this time. You don't know what kind of design you're going to be given this week, whether it's the weirdo Gillman Ninja Turtle designs of the Sea Devils, or god, what else would be there? Or the really wacky robot computer voices of the Mondasian Cybermen. You really just don't know, and that's such a fun part, and it's why I said with Earthshock, there's a cartoonish element, I think, with definitely with classic Doctor Who, and even to an extent, reboot Doctor Who, certainly RTD's era. Now, there is one other thing I would like to point out here, and I was going to mention this in the Earthshock episode, but I'll do it here instead. Okay. I think you said at some point, the fact that the effects in Earthshock, for example, do look a bit fake, that doesn't bother you as much as, sort of bad CGI in mid-2000s Doctor Who, or even mid-2000s certain action movies that we've seen.
Yeah.
And I have a theory as to why, and I probably touched on this a little bit last time, but I'll elaborate. So I don't know if anyone's come up with this phrase before. If they have, I certainly don't want to be.
What a good lead into an explanation.
If they have, credit to whoever did, but I think what is happening there is what you might describe as a kind of special effects uncanny valley, and what I mean by that is the special effects of modern Doctor Who, the CGI effects, I mean, some of them, they're trying to be closer to a realistic, real-world special effect, but because they can't quite make it, because they're not quite realistic enough to really kind of sell it, you feel kind of discombobulated when you watch it. And there are examples of this, like the werewolf or the Lazarus monster in particular.
See, but I think the werewolf really holds up for me. The Lazarus monster is just awful.
Yeah, fair enough. But either way, you know what I mean. That's kind of just the nature of technology.
Yeah.
The CGI, a fair bit of it, I think you may say, hasn't aged terribly well in terms of realism. But with Classic Who, because once you get used to what Classic Who is, the fact that it's this really strange, melodramatic, kind of stagey show, once your brain just kind of adjusts to that style, when you have, laser effects that clearly look like they're little, really old bits of CGI just sort of tacked onto the image, and once you see the cartoonish makeup effects, it all works because that's just the style that you're used to. Again, it's this idea of there being a kind of uncanny valley where it's nowhere near realistic enough to be considered realistic, but because of that, it's fine. You don't mind it. Your brain just sort of submits to this cartoonification of visual language. So I think that is what's happening with a lot of these effects when you compare New Who to Classic Who. So yeah, I just wanted to get that out there because I have a feeling that may crop up quite a lot when during this podcast.
Oh, well, you're welcome for coming to your TED Talk, I guess.
Yes, thank you for listening to me drone on for however long that was.
Quick aside before we move on to more important aspects of this episode.
Uh-huh.
This episode, it does a lot of future humor. Taking
this is an iPod.
That we know of, and yeah, exactly. I think this was an iPod. Let's listen to a traditional ballad, Toxic,
Tainted Love.
Tainted Love, yeah. But also, something I noticed, I think this is the first episode and only episode of Doctor Who to do it, where they put symbols in names of things. I know it's the only time that they put not a number in the name of the year that it is. They say it's 5 billion apple something.
Yeah.
And I think they realized after they did that, well, that's just way too confusing to figure out the timeline. So they just, ever since they just reverted back to going with regular numbers. And I always forget that Cassandra's full name has a triangle in it.
Mm.
She's Cassandra O'Brien Triangle 17.
Mm.
That's just a weird quirk of this episode that I don't think comes back again.
No, I don't think so either. And look, I have to kind of give them credit for trying to do something a bit different. That obviously thinking, oh, we're way in the future. How can we make this wacky and strange?
It just adds to the fish out of water stuff with Rose. How society is becoming incredibly different than what it used to be.
And it could conceivably work. I mean, I don't know, maybe this is a lame kind of comparison, but maybe they're almost like the future equivalent of emojis or something. God, that sounds lame to say, but you know what I mean. Yeah,
well, Apple. The future equivalent of emojis will happen in a 10th Doctor episode. Well, the 12th Doctor, rather. That happens in Smile with the emoji bots.
Right. Yeah, of course.
We'll get to that in a long time.
But, the futurism, I guess you could call it, it's... I admire what they do with it, and it's quite fun just watching, the Doctor sort of bop along to Tainted Love. It's just a funny little quirk. I do quite enjoy that. Having said that, in terms of sort of sci-fi realism, it does kind of break the illusion for me a little bit, because, like, Cassandra says, oh, yeah, like, this is classical music, but think about this. That music is 5 billion years old. Like, the classical music that we listen to nowadays, that's only, like, 300 years old at the very most.
Well, also, you would call, in 5 billion years, like, classical music that we know would also be classical music for them. Like, when they listen to Mozart, they're not going to say, this was 5,300,000,000 years ago. Like, it's all 5 billion years.
Yeah, it's like, this is...
I am wondering, what is the cutoff point? Like, when did they decide, right, this is all classical music now? And, everything, like, I really think that, like, Justin Bieber the 22nd really defines the modern era of music. That's where everything after then, that's the modern era. Everything before then, that's classical.
That's how that goes to a whole. I mean, granted, I'm not a music expert, but that goes to a whole argument that I think people are still having about what's classical and what's not. But I'm not gonna go down that rabbit hole, because we'll be here for a while.
Isn't it the age of information? Isn't it like when that began? Like, as soon as we started like keeping proper records of stuff, that's when the modern era began.
All right, I guess we are going down this rabbit hole.
Let's try as condensed as possible.
As far as I understand it, classical music is the classical period, which was during the 1700s, the Enlightenment era, whereas people will listen to, like, a movie score by, like, Bernard Herrmann, or listen to music by Ligeti or Stravinsky, and they'll think, oh, that's classical music, but technically it's really modern because it was made in the early 20th century. So, again, that's just a bit of pretentious know-how there, but yeah, it'd be hard to say what classical music would be, but you're not wrong to point out that, like, if you know, musicians like Bach and Beethoven, if they are classical now, they probably would still be classical in 5 billion years if they've kept records for music for that long. And God knows, I mean, again, that's 5 billion years. Like, there would have to be way more music than you know, Tainted Love and Toxic.
There would have to be so much new music, and it might also be like the instruments are going to evolve as well. Like they'll discover new, like we see an alien musical instrument 4 episodes from now in Dalek. Once we start incorporating that kind of stuff into our music, maybe that's when they define classical music. 5 billion years from now is when they start integrating alien instruments. Like, everything that was solely confined to Earth, that's classical, because that's classic Earth.
Yeah.
And that also ties into Cassandra, how it's like, I'm the last human because I'm the last pure human. Everyone else, they've been mingling with aliens. They're not classic humans. I'm a classical human.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And that actually leads us neatly onto Cassandra, the villain of this episode.
Yeah. I'll share a brief little sort of anecdote thing if I can.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was getting ready to watch this episode again, I thought back to that bit where Rose just calls Cassandra a bitchy trampoline.
Yep.
And remember how shocked I was to hear that as a kid, because it's like, here's the thing, it's not like super shocking. You know, it's a show in the mid-2000s, sure, people having words like that, I mean, it's not terrible, but to me, because I'd grown up on Doctor Who and I was only like 11 at the time, it was a bit disconcerting, especially given that I don't think they talk like that a lot in any subsequent episode. I mean, I might be wrong there. But...
No, it's one of 2 swear words uttered in Doctor Who, the second of which was by Missy in early season 9, referring to herself.
What did she say?
Oh, I don't remember the context. I think she's speaking to a Dalek, and she says, like, of Davros, she says, tell them the bitch is back, or something like that. She says that.
Yeah.
And it's like that. But, like, it's always, like, this this line is, like, very... It stands out to me so much. Because, like, again, it's the first time that a swear had ever been uttered on Doctor Who. But even then, like, it came from Rose, the golden child. Like I'm just thinking, like, not even Donna in her, like, most aggressive moment swore at anyone.
I think it's a case of them. I said this as well with the first episode. I think they're still trying to find their feet as a show. They're still trying to figure out, oh, what is our demographic? The weird thing is, though, even though in the first episode they do these really strange, almost childish bits of humor, like the burping bin, for example, but now they've gone the opposite way. So it's like, yeah, we've got, you know, a 19-year-old. Let's appeal to that demographic. So
it's a bit weird. Like and there's a lot of this in this first season as well. I think a lot of episodes kind of struggle to hit that balance between the two different audiences they're trying to appeal to. It wouldn't be until, like, maybe season 3 that they really nail that balance.
I might disagree with you there, but I'd again, you know more on reboot series than I do, so perhaps it's weird that this might be a bit of an extreme way to put it, but it's weird that they're almost trying to teeter between, like, a sorry I've got no head and a Skins crowd, which is just it's just strange listening to that line. Anyway, so I was prepared to be kind of shocked by that, but when I watched it, it didn't shock me all that much. I just thought, oh, okay, yeah, that might have been a bit of a blunder, but whatever. That wasn't the shock to me. The shock to me was when Cassandra's talking about the other humans, and she says that they're basically mongrels, and I'm like,
yeah,
man, I'd forgotten that Cassandra was a bit of a, how shall we say it? Like, it sounds like an almost fascist mentality. Like, what? Okay.
Well, it's so strange because it's a mentality that doesn't really factor into her plan. Like, she has this, like, it's just something that I think they threw that in there so that they could kill her in this episode and not have it be sympathetic. Because, like, her plan is to, destroy Platform 1, and then insurance or something or other. Like, it's all about money, like the Doctor says. It's all
like,
about
hold
money.
Their lives for ransom. And
hold their lives for ransom, that's it, yeah. And it's going to become a pattern of villains this season with their end goals being money or power. Like, it bizarrely comes up a lot in this season, and we'll get to that. But that philosophy doesn't really tie into her philosophy of how she sees herself and how she sees other humans, quote, quote, doesn't really factor into that story. Like, if it had been a racially motivated crime.
Yeah. Like, here are all these aliens on my spaceship watching my Earth. Just
this is my planet.
Yeah.
And they're, like, these aliens have come here and they've taken the place of good, honest humans who could have been watching the Earth explode. Like, it could have been like a classic. They've taken our jobs, like, but transposed into the future, which honestly is a very sci-fi thing to do. Is to take, like, a problem, or, you know, it's not a problem, is it? But, like, to take a mentality or, like, a mindset of the,
or a social issue, yeah,
or a social issue is the word I was looking for, of the current day, and putting it in a futuristic or off, like, a different setting, but, like, you know, shining a light on it in a different way.
Here's the thing, that particular idea has been done in Doctor Who before and done better. The best example being Davros.
Yeah.
You know, the interesting kind of irony that this guy who's obsessed with racial purity, he, because he's, you know, sort of half cybernetic, you know, by his own horrible, disgusting standards, you know, how much of a Khaled is he? And then there's all these interesting conflicts. There's a bit where he, in Resurrection of the Daleks, when he looks like he's dying, and he says, you know, I am not a Dalek, I cannot die, I am Davros. And so you wonder all this nice little psychological nuances, and in the Big Finish productions, I think they expand on it further in there's an Eighth Doctor story called Terra Firma, where the Doctor meets Davros, and Davros is basically losing his mind. He's sort of cyberized a good chunk of his body, and he says, you know, I'm losing Davros, I'm losing who I am. So it's a weird sort of sort of
Ship of Theseus.
yeah, exactly, horrifying racism mixed with Ship of Theseus sort of stuff. So I find it interesting that they would go that route, and it does make sense. But as I say, it's just been done better. And they also even did it with Morbius, in the brain of Morbius. There's a bit where he's talking to the Doctor and Sarah, and the Doctor's like, there's very little of Morbius left. Why not think of another name? Potpourri would be appropriate. And then Sarah's like, oh, how about Chop Suey? And the Doctor's like, Chop Suey the Galactic Emperor. Because he's a Frankensteinian hodgepodge of things.
Yeah.
Potpourri and Chop Suey. So it's, it's interesting that they go that route, but I think you're right to point out it doesn't quite fit in to the rest of the plot. But I think you could argue that is just them playing it safe again, because, one, if you're going to be talking about a Doctor Who villain with insane, racist, fascist sort of mentalities, it's going to be the Daleks. Also, like, pushing the audience into the deep end of, like, racial purity
on
from
the second
last
episode.
That's like, okay, that's something else.
Yeah, no, it definitely is sort of a thing where it's like, it's there, and it's a part of the character, and it makes it so that her really rather gruesome death can kind of be shrugged off by the audience at the end, being like, well, I'm not really that concerned. That said, it does factor in towards the end when she's caught out, where the Doctor's like, people have died, and she's like, well, that depends how you define a person. Which has always been a genuinely hilarious line to me, because that implies, wait a minute, are you saying that galactic law only covers, like, one species? That's not how it works. That's not how the Shadow Proclamation works, and that's been established since 2005.
Or, yeah. I mean, and look, in terms of the question as to, what's human and what's not, what deserves basic respect and dignity, that's a theme that I think crops up quite a few times in even Classic Who, for example. And again, we'll get to this later, but in the Sea Devils it comes up. So anyway.
I think in terms of this story, Cassandra works as a villain.
Yeah, I agree. It's a nice twist. I mean, you could argue, you can kind of see it coming, but
it still works. It's her and Jabe are the aliens that are given the most focus out of anyone, and Jabe's with the Doctor, so it kind of makes sense that Cassandra's the villain. So it's not that shocking. It is, I suppose, if you're a kid and you're like, oh, yeah. And I think we have to talk about Moisturize Me. I think that it is the first meme of the revived era.
Speaking of which, this is a slight digression, but I just find it funny that some of the characters were called adherents of the repeated meme. Now,
yes.
Granted, I didn't start using the internet regularly until, like, 2011, and I'm basically, like, an old man when it comes to technology, but I don't even know if meme as, like, a word in the way it's used now was even used all that much back then, so...
it definitely wouldn't have been. It's,
So... and because of that, I had no idea what that word meant when I first saw it.
So the first definition of a meme is an element of a culture or system of behavior passed from one individual to another by imitation or other non-genetic means.
Yeah, it's like a cultural little evolution.
Yeah. Which is why it's always hilarious when the Doctor's like, I mean, it's just an idea. It's just a repeated idea.
Yeah, so it's... Anyway, so getting back to what you're saying, yes, the Moisturize Me being the first kind of meme of it. I mean, you're not wrong, but yeah.
I don't think there's much to talk about that. It's just interesting to point that out.
Oh, okay, yeah, fair enough.
We just touched on the Doctor. We haven't really talked about him in this episode yet. I think this is a really, really solid Doctor episode for the Doctor. Because, like, in the first episode, we have, like, the majority of it is about the mystery surrounding who he is. Mm-hmm. And then doesn't have much to do in the climax. He has to be saved by Rose. But here we get to see the Doctor, like, we're not just, like, seeing him, like, every now and then. Like, we're not getting half of the story like we did in the previous episode. This time we're following him throughout a lot of it. And we're seeing his how his investigation process, how he goes about things. But we also get quite a lot of range from him. Because when we get... I was talking earlier about emotional acting moments. We get that in spades when Jay is talking to him about, I know who you are, I know where you're from, I'm truly sorry.
Yeah, and doesn't he start tearing up at that point?
He starts tearing up, and, like, a lot of that is like he doesn't say anything throughout the entire exchange, and a lot of it we're focusing on Jabe, and like I think it just cuts to him, and the look on his face is like you can tell it's the first time that he's actually processed the Time War, because the rest of the time he's just like boom, 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 boom. Oh, Autons, go to who's this Rose person? Okay, now we're here, end of the world. Something wrong with the spaceship,
the man,
and then that's the first moment that he actually gets to like properly think about it, and
the
like
man who keeps running.
Yeah, and it really affects him. So we get that moment, but then we also get the rage at the end when after Jabe has been killed and the Doctor's managed to resolve the conflict. How he's like, I've got great ideas. This is my first idea. This is a relay device. Boom, teleport. I'm going to confront you, Cassandra, and I'm going to watch you die. Like, that fury there in those moments, it's like, holy crap. Like, and Eccleston is so good.
He is. I do think he's a bit underrated because he was only given a season, but he really does a solid job of just conveying, as you say, the emotional range and how kind of the trauma of what the Doctor has gone through weighs heavy on his Doctor. It really, it's just a solid performance. And even when he, lets Cassandra die, when I watched that, again, when I watched this episode recently, that did shock me a little bit because there's something about it that seems a bit cruel, but then I thought it's perfectly in line with who he is, specifically what his interpretation of the Doctor is and what RTD's interpretation of the Doctor is. And I don't know, maybe I say that mainly because, we know about the Time War now. And we know about how traumatic that was and the fact that he became the War Doctor, but either way, it's still all fits together. The fact that he's not messing around, they convey that pretty effectively. And it's quite emotionally stirring.
His decision to not save Cassandra, I think it is motivated by the fact that he is slightly darker from the Time War, but also like, the way he says it, everything has its time and everything dies. Like that genuinely fits into the Doctor's philosophy even before then. It is a bit extreme, and I think that the 10th Doctor certainly would have attempted to try and save her, I think. And we do see that in the next season, when Cassandra's possessed her servant and his body's failing. And the Doctor's like, we can help you out. And she's like, no, I think it's time. That is like the clearest evidence that, this entire season is all about de-darkening the Doctor from the Time War. And rightly so.
Yeah, and I think, two things. First, even in, the Christmas invasion, at the end he gets a bit dark, the whole no second chances, that's the person true. I am. But that, again, that's just part of the transition process away from that sort of darker Doctor. The other thing I'll say is, when he lets Cassandra die, the characterization is handled really well up to that point, because again, as you say, we've just seen Jabe die, and right after, he'd just been confronted with how bad the Time War really was. So all those emotions are clearly, kicking around in his head. And then the last sort of nail in the coffin was when he finds out, again, after 5 billion years, it just all comes down to money. Well, that's really gross. So,
yeah. Like, he gives her a lot of chances, and then...
Yeah, and then it turns out, she's just a greedy, pathetic human.
Yeah. Also with the Doctor, like, it's such a like ham-fisted moment, but when he steps through the propeller blades, I'm always like, oh. Like, it takes the moment, he closes his eyes, like he zones out everything else, and then he just steps through the propeller blade, and the look on his face afterwards is always like, oh, that's really cool. That being said, maybe don't set up that room like that.
Yeah. Oh, actually, that's another thing I was going to say. I don't like the special effects in that area of the show.
No, yeah, that is where it's kind of bad.
Yeah, convincing. Now, having said that, I think you're right to point out that bit there being quite emotionally resonant, because I think, given just, again, the visual style of the show at that point of the episode, and the fact that you have the really sort of fairly melodramatic, rousing sort of Bad Wolf music coming in, it would have been easy to mess that up. And I think it would have been easy to mess it up even if you didn't have the right actor, but Eccleston just really sells it. And the fact that they took that kind of a risk both in terms of narrative, but even in terms of style. And it paid off is really satisfying. So kudos to them, honestly. To
But
RTD and
again,
the team.
maybe don't put the switch to reactivate the heat shields behind 3 giant ass propellers.
Yeah.
And that is, like, as much as we gotta... There is a lot of writing in this episode that I'm kind of like, that doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything surrounding the steward's death, like, you know, I understand that the robot spiders had been messing with the station, but to have the heat shields in your room be controlled by a single button, that's...
Yeah.
At least make that a control command.
Yeah, because even when, Rose is in danger, when it's the sun filter is lowering, like, they hack into the actual technology, like the mainframe, to get that to happen, don't they?
Yeah, the Doctor has to, dig into, the wiring of the ship. Also, this is another note, but, why make the heat shields able to be lowered at all?
Yeah.
Why would you ever need to do that?
I myself, when it comes to, these specific plot holes, and even plot holes, well, I don't know if you call them plot holes, but slight inconsistencies, shall we say, they don't bother me personally. And again, I don't know whether that's because of my love of classic Who, where again you get some really wacky stuff. And does it always all make sense? No, but I can accept that. It doesn't bother me terribly. They're not like big narrative flaws that get to me. But again, it's good you do point that out, because you wonder, why if because you're near the sun.
Yeah,
why wouldn't you have sun filters there?
The entire purpose of the space station is to watch the sun.
Yeah, like
expand.
wouldn't the glass just have a natural anti-UV screen thing on it or something? I mean, it's year 5 billion. Surely they could have come up with some sort of technology to not have the sun roast people to death. To have some people roasted to death by the sun.
My thing about that's generally gruesome as well, by the way.
When you think about it,
the Mox of Balhoun being roasted by the raw power of the sun, that's just an unpleasant way to go. I think I may have mentioned this before, but my thinking in regards to plot holes and plot conveniences and stuff, where it's I'm not bothered by it if I can explain it away. Ideally, I should be able to explain it away with stuff that the episode gives us.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do that with this one, and I also just can't explain a lot of it away in general. Why set up that room with the big propellers? Why not just have the reactivation switch handy? Why, a lot of the stuff, it gets in my head, so when I'm watching it, I'm really focusing on that, and that does kind of detract a lot for me. If it doesn't for you, great. But it is sometimes those nitpicky moments really do take a lot away, and sometimes they don't. It just depends on how much you're willing to accept.
Yep, that's fair. So again, may not bother me as much, but I can understand why, certainly why you'd be bothered by it, because it's it's there, and yeah.
But I think the story really comes together in the last 3 minutes or so.
Yeah.
And it really ties into the emotional journey with Rose really well. Because she has her moment with the Doctor where she's like, you didn't even tell me that it did this.
Yeah.
And it's we're all I'm dead from your perspective. And he tricks out her phone. He lets her call her mother. In a really genuinely good conversation.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the episode, you get the whole no one was watching as the Earth exploded. All that history. And it feeds back into that, we're all dead from your perspective. It feeds back into that thing of how the Doctor sees people. And it's Rose's first time really seeing things from his point of view.
Yeah.
And that, of course, foreshadows the end of the season when she becomes Bad Wolf and is able to see exactly what he sees. But then he takes her back to Earth in the present day. And during that conversation, you can really, really see Rose's thought process as she's thinking everything through. It's a really well written exchange between her and the Doctor, where he's talking about the human race is going to survive. You think you won't, but you will. He then transitions to finally mentioning Gallifrey and how it's gone and how his species are gone in the war. And he gives her the opportunity to leave because it gets rather dangerous. And she's like, well, she's genuinely weighing it up in her head, but then she gets distracted by Chips. And I think that's a really nice moment because like those are big questions.
Yeah,
it is a lot of big stuff that this episode raises.
And I think, sorry, go ahead.
And I think that the simplicity of being distracted by like the comforts of modern life and like, just have like, it is that kind of thing that I love about this show where it's like, and the Doctor brings it up all the time where it's like, and it's mentioned in Earthshock as well when he confronts the Cybermen. It's like, when's the last time you had a well-prepared meal or whatever that exact dialogue was? Like that's like the philosophy of the show, and really it's the philosophy of humanity as well. Like meaning of life, everyone thinks about this big scale stuff, what's our purpose in the universe? Forget all that. Just enjoy life.
Yeah.
And that's what the show is doing. That's what this moment is about, where it's like, weighing up between all these big decisions and then just like, I kind of want to eat something. You want to get something? Let's go eat something.
Yeah, this is actually a small bit of comparison that I think is worth making. In the episode The Three Doctors, there's a guy who, at the beginning, I think he's doing some duck hunting, and he gets transported with the doctors and their companions to the antimatter universe, and he doesn't have a lot to do in the episode, but like right at the end, he gets dropped off back to exactly where he was, and I think I'm perhaps misremembering here, but he says something like, "Oh, I wonder what my wife has got on for dinner," and I think then his wife calls him, but that's another sign of this element, that those small comforts, the ability to kind of pause, in a story where most of the time you're rushing around time and space, those are important. And they make human existence and really all kind of existence. That's the beauty of it. And the Doctor is one of those sort of small comforts people. For example, as again I said with this episode, that little it's such a fun little bit of acting and nuance too, but when he's bopping along to Tainted Love, that's him, like he's genuinely enjoying that, and kudos of course has to be given to Eccleston's great performance, but that's a really important part of the Doctor, that there is clearly an element of whimsy to their personality, but it works at its best when it's grounded in those realistic small little activities that the Doctor likes to do. I
agree. I think that the last 3 minutes of the story really exemplify the episode as a whole, where it's like its plot works in favor of its emotional story and its place in the larger narrative.
Yeah.
I just wish the plot was better.
Yeah, fair. Because again, I think you said, like, it's good that it didn't sort of fall apart at the end, that you've got that pretty good resolution and indeed the climax, but yeah, you wonder whether they couldn't have just strung every little bit together, made it a bit more believable, sorted out, as you say, the plot conveniences. So yeah, I think I wouldn't say I have like major issues with this story, even with the plot inconsistencies in mind. As I say, they're there, and I understand why you or anyone else would be bothered by them, but they're not a serious bother for me. But what I would say about this episode is that they are taking some risks in kind of, sort of plunging you into this strange alien world with all these alien creatures. But when you break down the plot, it's fairly, I don't know if I'd say run of the mill, but I feel like I've seen this plot before, like the whole, the twist villain and timey-wimey adventures and, companion in trouble, Doctor's got to save them. I feel like I've seen that a fair bit, and that's fine for what it is, the second episode of a reboot season. As I said with the
you do kind of want something familiar.
Yeah, they couldn't. It would have been difficult for them again to bombard the audience with really strained plots or too much cannon fodder. So I think it works for what it wants to do. It's fine. But you know, when I was watching, once I got to the end of the episode, I'm like, I'm still kind of waiting for the show to really sort of kick off and do something interesting.
Yeah,
and it hadn't quite got there yet. So good, fine, decent, does what it wants to do, but it left me wanting more, is what I'm saying.
I think I agree with that. Do you want to give this episode an official rating now?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with a 6 for this.
Yeah, once again, we're on the same page. I give it a 6 as well. Plot does what it needs to do, not without its conveniences. Great episode for the Doctor. Rose isn't insufferable yet. Good emotional arc for all the characters involved.
Yeah, and good dialogue too. I mean, the conversations.
Fine dialogue.
The Doctor and Rose I quite like, and even the little exchanges between Cassandra and Rose. Although, again, that might just be because I was really surprised when I watched this recently that she says, "Oh yeah, no, there's other so-called humans. They're mongrels." I'm like, okay, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
But as you say, those bits of dialogue, they do help with the emotional arcs. And you could argue they're kind of even more satisfying than the episode as a whole. You could say that the sum is greater than the whole, basically.
Yeah, I was about to try and work out how I was going to phrase that, but yeah, that sums up this episode pretty nicely, I think.
Yes, I'd agree.
Well, that's been another episode of Two Who's Review. I've been Alex.
I've been Fitz.
And next time, we're going to explore the classic series episode, The Sea Devils.
Oh, boy.
Can't wait for that one. Until then, take care.
See you later.